My guest this time is Deroy Murdock. He's a founding member of the Project 21 Black Leadership Network. He's a syndicated columnist, and he also writes for National Review Online. He has written extensively also in the wake of Kanye West's visit to the White House last week, and not only in reaction to that, but to the liberal media reaction to that. So, Deroy, thanks very much for being with us today. We appreciate it.
Thanks for having me on.
You have been very critical of the reaction here. You write, one of the civil rights movement's most gripping images showed black male protesters who each held a placard that read, "I am a man." These individual declarations of independence and expressions of personal sovereignty propelled the struggle for dignity that cost Dr. Martin Luther King his life. The leftists in the media and political establishment who now hammer Kanye West essentially want him to carry a sign that says, "I am not a man." They do not want West to think for himself, challenge liberal orthodoxy, or be his own person. Pretty strong reaction. What do you find is the basis of that?
Well, I couldn't have put it better myself.
You did.
I did. I think what's most striking about this sort of thing is people didn't come out and say, Kanye is mistaken, he has his facts wrong, he should have thought about this, and he didn't. The attacks are so much more personal, so much more deep, so much more profound, calling him a token Negro. This is what happens when Negroes don't read. Don Lemon at CNN said his appearance at the White House was like a minstrel show. I mean, these are awful, horrible words. You know, if you're a white talk show host and you're on television or radio, what have you, and you say something with which people disagree, they'll explain the disagreement, but they won't say, "Oh, you're a bad white person," or "You're letting down the Caucasian race," or "You're white trash." You never have that. They just disagree with your ideas. In this case, the idea or the concept was to eviscerate Kanye West completely from head to toe, inside out, and that sort of thing is what I find so objectionable and so horrible.
So what do you think folks fear, if in fact fear is the right word, that if more people think like Kanye West?
Oh, I think the fear is profound on the left, and that is that if more black folks start thinking, well, Kanye West is onto something, or, well, if Donald J. Trump is willing to sit down with Kanye West, maybe he's really not the white supremacist, racist bigot that people have been led to believe he is. And if they start looking at things like the fact that this economy is now growing at, I think the first half is 3.9% versus 1.9% in the first half of 2016 when Obama was in the White House. You look at the fact black unemployment is at its lowest level, or very close to its lowest level in U.S. history. Black entrepreneurship is up. All sorts of good things are happening under Republican leadership and President Trump's leadership. And if black voters start saying, well, this guy's not so bad and things are going well, and maybe we ought to give him a chance, all of a sudden, if 8 out of 10 black Democrats stick with the Democrats and 2 out of 10 switch over and vote for the GOP, it's absolutely curtains for the Democrats. They cannot afford to lose that large a share of their most loyal part of their base. If they do, the base collapses, and I think the left is terrified of that. And so what they want to do is just clam up, humiliate, and otherwise demolish Kanye West, so nobody listens to him, and their nightmare scenario does not come true.
There are opinion polls out there that show the president's black approval rating is in the mid-30s. Now, that doesn't obviously necessarily translate to votes, that a third of black voters would vote for him. You just mentioned that 20% would be curtains for the Democratic Party. So how do you read those numbers?
If those numbers are correct, and 36% of black folks approve of President Trump, and let's say half of them decide to vote GOP, that's 18%. That's enormous. He only got 8% of the black vote in 2016 when he ran against Hillary Clinton. Now, that sounds terrible. That's not a high number. But Mitt Romney only got 6%. So Donald Trump, believe it or not, despite all these accusations of racism and so on, actually outperformed Mitt Romney among black voters by 1/3, which is incredible. Now, if you go from 8% up to 18%, and you've got tight races for Senate, tight races for U.S. House, for governor, what have you, that could be the margin of victory. That could be what actually propels somebody like Ted Cruz back into the U.S. Senate, somebody like Ron DeSantis into the governor's mansion in Tallahassee. That could be what gets Martha McSally over the finish line in Arizona, over Kristen Sinema. So that small number, you've seen some of these races, particularly in the primaries. I know these are primaries, not the general election. But Chris Kobach, who's running for governor of Kansas, he won his primary by about 300 votes. Back in 2014, the last time we had a midterm, Martha McSally won her House seat by just 167 votes. Going back to 2008, I think it was, Norm Coleman lost his seat to Al Franken by about 325 votes, I think it was. So we have a lot of these elections that come down to just a few hundred votes. And if you have a few hundred black folks see Kanye West and think, you know what, the Democrats really have let us down, let's give the Republicans a chance, it can be curtains for Democrats in very tight races.
We're talking with Deroy Murdock. He's a syndicated columnist, founding member of the Project 21 Black Leadership Network, writes for National Review Online. And Deroy, one of the things I've seen folks on both sides of the aisle point out, though, is do Republicans and conservatives, black or white, really want to hang their hats on Kanye West? This is a guy who, of course, last decade said that George Bush, meaning George W. Bush, didn't care about black people in the wake of Hurricane Katrina. He had the Taylor Swift moment. He's been known to say some pretty outrageous things, and even in his trip to the White House, he said things like "time is a myth," and his public statements are not sound bites; they're like a fine wine. So, is there a risk for Republicans to really align themselves carefully with a guy who's known to be a loose cannon at times?
Well, I don't think you need a full alignment. I don't think anybody says that Kanye West needs to become the chairman of the Republican National Committee. I'm not recommending that. I do think it is perfectly fair for Republicans and people on the right to say he has a right to speak his mind without being attacked the way he was and being so personally disemboweled by the left. The man ought to be able to get up and say, look, like the civil rights protesters in the 60s, I am a man. This is what I think. These are my views. I have a right to decide what I want. Just because I'm black doesn't mean I have to parrot the Democrats' line. And I'm an independent human being, and I should be free to think what I want to think. And I applaud him for that. Other people attack him for that. That he's a black man. He has to think a certain set of views. How dare he? I think Maxine Waters at one point actually said he should shut up, if I remember her words correctly, which I thought was just awful and horrible. So I think the man has a right to say what he does, and I think the GOP, without overly embracing every word he says and every word he has said, ought to be able to defend the man's right to think for himself and speak up for himself.
We talked about the scientific numbers of how black Americans view the performance of President Trump so far. What about anecdotally? Is Kanye West the exception or the rule here?
Oh, I think he's still the exception. I mean, I think the majority of black folks have not switched over to being pro-Trump. I mean, if he's got 36% approval among blacks, I mean, he has 64% disapproval. So I don't think anybody's saying that things have switched, 90% pro-Democrat to 90% pro-GOP. I don't think that's the case. But the thing is that even a small reduction in support among Democrats by black folks has a really profound effect because blacks are so loyal to the Democrats and are so dependable part of their base. It's like a big brick wall. You take a few bricks out of the bottom, the whole thing falls over. And I think that's a situation that they face. But I think anecdotally, you can look, for example, at this movement started by a man named Brandon Straka, S-T-R-A-K-A, I think it is. It's called the Walk Away Movement, and these are Democrats who looked at the way the Democrats have been behaving and said, look, I walk away. I'm not part of the Democrat Party anymore. And he has a lot of videos on his website, and many of them are black folks saying, look, my parents were Democrats, my grandparents were Democrats, but this is not my father's Democratic Party. This is not my mother's Democratic Party. And you look at the way they treated Judge Kavanaugh, people in the streets, people wearing Make America Great Again hats who are getting physically beaten in the streets until they bleed, Republican Party offices getting attacked. And you have a lot of even black folks looking at the Democratic Party and saying this has turned into a violent mob of democratic socialists, far-left radical extremists, and they want no part of this. And looking at issues from them wanting to raise taxes if they get back in, wanting to abolish ICE, wanting not open borders, but I put it no borders. Just erase the border between the U.S. and Mexico. Anybody who wants to waltz in can waltz in. If you're a criminal and you are engaged in all sorts of violent crime, if you're in one of these sanctuary cities or sanctuary states, or as I call them, fugitive cities and fugitive states, the left wants you to be free to walk down the street and commit more mayhem if you're an illegal alien. They stick up for those folks more than they stick up for American citizens, including black American citizens. So I think anecdotally you have more and more black folks looking at this and saying, this is not the party in which I grew up and the party in which my family grew up, and they're walking away in increasing numbers.
Fascinating to watch. We'll see if it grows from here. Certainly a lot of attention just last week, and we'll see what the impact might be in November and beyond. Deroy, thank you very much for your time today. We greatly appreciate it.
Oh, you bet. Thank you very much.
Deroy Murdock is a founding member of the Project 21 Black Leadership Network. He is a syndicated columnist, and you can see his writings in a number of places, including National Review Online. I'm Greg Columbus reporting for Radio America.